arrogant classmates invite poor black student 3 years later to mock him. Unaware he's now worth $100, Miguel Green read the letter and stood still for a moment, unsure how to react. The invitation was a painful reminder of the past, a time in his life when he felt insignificant. Rutherford Academy seemed so distant now, but the memories were vivid in his mind, as if everything had happened just yesterday. When he received the letter, a chill ran down his spine. The handwriting was elegant, but there was something forced about it, as if it tried to soften the brutality of the invitation. Class of 2018 reunion, you are invited. Miguel laughed to himself, but it wasn't a laugh of happiness. It was a smile from someone who, though changed, knew that the past still had a way of resurfacing at the most unexpected times. He recalled the times he was called weird, the odd guy, the only black kid in a school full of white uniforms, where no one seemed to understand what he truly was or wanted to be. He carried a silent pain, but the ignorance of others only fed an inner strength he didn't yet know how to wield. His life at school wasn't just hard because of racial stereotypes. It was also because of poverty, worn-out shoes, faded clothes, and having to hear that he would never amount to anything in life. Despite that, Miguel never gave up. On the contrary, he found refuge in what he could control, his mind. In the moments when others mocked or ignored him, he was immersed in the world of programming, computers, and algorithms. They didn't know it, but he was creating something far bigger than they could ever imagine. Now, 3 years removed from that place, Miguel's life was very different. He was no longer that sad, invisible kid. He was the CEO of a growing tech company, and his name was beginning to be mentioned among the greats in the industry. But the letter made him stop and think, do I really need to go back to this place? Do I need to face these memories again? But Miguel knew that this reunion wasn't about the past or the need to prove anything to others. It was about him showing, without words, how much he had changed. To them, he would always be the same weird kid. But to him, that no longer mattered. He was there to show his own truth. Miguel wasn't sure what to do with the invitation. He stared at it for a few minutes, the words, "You are invited," still echoing in his mind, stirring a whirlwind of emotions. He remembered the first time he was ignored, the first time he felt the world saw him as invisible. Rutherford Academy had been, for him, a battleground. Among the narrow hallways, where students stood out simply for being normal and accepted, Miguel saw himself as the odd one, the only black kid among so many others with their seemingly perfect lives. He didn't fit in there, not in that place, and now that invitation seemed like a call to revisit the pain he had left behind. When he was still at school, the jokes started small, subtle, but over time, they became part of his reality. He remembered how he felt the weight of the words in his head, like each laugh was a sharp blade. They thought it was funny to call him weird. To the others, he was the exotic one, the exception in a world where everyone fit neatly into the expected mold. But Miguel wasn't an exception. He was just himself, but no one saw him that way. The feeling of not being accepted bothered him more back then. He wanted, like any teenager, to make friends, to be included. But no matter how hard he tried to fit in, it never seemed to work. He remembered the lunches alone, the conversations that never included him, the friend groups that passed by him like he was a shadow, something no one wanted to look at. But he refused to give in to sadness. Instead, he poured himself into what he did best, learning. He threw himself into his studies, his quiet passions, building and discovering tech solutions on his own. "I know what you're thinking," his mother's voice said in his mind. She always told him that even in the toughest times, he should keep believing in what was inside him. What you have inside you is something no one can take away. That, son, will take you farther than anything else. She had always believed in him, even when no one else seemed to see his worth. But now, looking at that invitation, Miguel felt he didn't need anyone's approval. The Miguel from before would have struggled, would have gone after answers, tried to explain himself. But the Miguel of now? He had something far more valuable, the power to be who he truly was. No apologies, no permission needed. He smiled, finally putting the invitation in his pocket. It was time to go back, not to show himself to others, but to show himself how far he had come. Miguel arrived at the Rutherford Academy banquet hall feeling more prepared than he had imagined. The first thing he noticed when he entered was the luxurious environment, excessively decorated for a reunion of old schoolmates. But he was beyond all of that now. The golden shine of the balloons and the warm light of the lamps no longer seemed to impress him like they had before. What lay ahead of him now was not the school that had disregarded him. It was just a hall full of people who knew nothing about him, and Miguel no longer cared about that. As he walked through the tables, he immediately felt the eyes turn toward him, but this time, he didn't feel uncomfortable. The muffled giggles began, almost imperceptible, as if they wanted to make fun of him. But again, Miguel was not there to meet their expectations. He was no longer the shy, insecure kid. The laughs and stares meant nothing to him now. As he walked to the table, he felt a pressure in his chest, but it was different. It was more excitement than anxiety. He sat down at a secluded chair in the corner of the room. Everyone was busy with their conversations and jokes. The table seemed like an improvised stage where everyone was showing off, but Miguel knew the real show wasn't going to happen there. It wasn't about who was at the front of the room or who could attract the most attention. It was about the silent impact of his success, something no one there knew he had achieved. Tyler, the former king of the school, was on stage with the microphone, making jokes about everyone. When he started talking about Miguel, the room paused briefly. Some forced laughs followed, as if the moment was expected. He was the target of the joke, the underdog they all thought would never succeed. But Miguel knew that it didn't affect him. He had moved beyond that role. When his name was called, Miguel simply stood up. The weight of the moment was clear, but he wasn't afraid. The audience was eager, the laughter dying down. But Miguel didn't rush. He took a step back, feeling calm. He moved toward the stage, slowly, without any feeling of anger or revenge. He was there to show something much stronger than a simple confrontation. He climbed onto the stage, took the microphone with the same calmness he had always displayed, and, with a gentle smile, said, "I'm not here to fight. I didn't come here for you to laugh at me. I came here to show you that yes, the weird guy from yesterday has a very different story today. Are you enjoying this story of overcoming challenges? What moment impacted you the most so far? Leave a comment below and share with us how you feel about Miguel's journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapter. Let's spread this inspiration." Miguel slowly climbed the stairs to the stage. The sensation of being watched no longer bothered him. With each step he took, he was met with stares of surprise and disbelief. He knew the world expected an emotional reaction, a shout of vengeance, something to give them the satisfaction of seeing his struggle. But Miguel wasn't there for that. He wasn't there to get back at anyone. What he had in mind was much deeper. He reached the microphone with impressive calm. The room was completely silent now, and Miguel had known from the start that this silence wouldn't last. But there was no more room for anger, for the insecurity of the past. He knew exactly what to do. With a small smile, he looked around at the audience, already feeling the growing tension. "I'm not here to fight, nor to make you feel guilty. What I have to say is much simpler than that," Miguel began, and his voice, contrary to what many might have expected, was serene. He wasn't in a rush. The audience, however, couldn't hide their discomfort. "When I was that boy, the weird one, the excluded one, I believed everything was about what others saw in me. I cared so much about your approval, about what you thought, that I forgot to look at what I was capable of being. I let you define who I should be." He paused and looked directly at the audience, as though silently confronting his old classmates, but in a direct way. "But today, I understand that true strength is not about waiting for the acceptance of others. It's in accepting yourself and moving forward, no matter what they say or think." Miguel then made a simple gesture, and the next moment, a slideshow began to appear on the screen. Images of Miguel at tech events, in interviews, and finally, a Forbes article highlighting his company with a market value of $100 million. The silence in the room was deep. The expressions on many faces began to change from disbelief to something closer to shame. They had never imagined that the weird kid from before, the one they never gave a chance, would become a reference. The room fell into deep silence. No sound except the faint hum of the projector, still displaying images of Miguel, now a $100 million man, a successful entrepreneur. The reactions began to spread, but Miguel knew that for him, it no longer mattered what they thought. What he had just shown wasn't for the audience. It was for himself. Tyler was at the front, still trying to keep his composure, but his forced smile no longer had the same shine. He didn't know how to react, and that made him more vulnerable than he had ever imagined. The jokes that once were his weapons now seemed so small in the face of the reality Miguel had just unveiled. The former king of the school tried to divert attention, but his words were sounding empty. "So Miguel, this is what you're doing now? You've grown up well, huh?" he said, trying to mask his nervousness with a forced laugh. But the audience wasn't with him anymore. They were looking at Miguel, not at Tyler. Miguel calmly looked at his former classmate, in no rush to respond. There was no anger in his eyes, only a peace that was hard to describe. He knew that somewhere, in this moment, everything was changing for him. He wasn't that kid anymore. What they thought or said no longer mattered. He had turned things around, quietly, with his own strength. "Tyler," Miguel said, his voice soft but full of meaning, "I don't need your jokes anymore. I don't need your approval. What I've built is not to please anyone but myself, and maybe you don't understand that. And that's fine." He paused, observing the faces in the audience. now more attentive. "I'm not that kid anymore, and I hope you're not the same people who once looked at me as if I were less." He gave a small smile and stepped away from the stage, finally feeling at peace. The voices of his classmates began to quiet as he left, and what lingered in the air was the echo of his words. "I'm not that kid anymore, and now nothing defines me but myself." Miguel left the hall slowly, feeling a mix of relief and reflection. The impact of the reveal was still fresh in his mind, but what he felt now was different from anything he had experienced before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pride, it was peace. The peace of knowing he had shown everyone what he was truly worth, but also the peace of understanding that for him, nothing else was necessary. He had already won his real victory. As he walked toward the exit, Miguel passed by several people, all in conversation, some still processing what had just happened. But something caught his attention. Brooke, one of the classmates who had always kept a distant and even disdainful attitude toward him, was standing there, watching him. Her eyes were no longer filled with contempt, but something else. Was it regret? Miguel hesitated for a moment, but didn't let doubt take over. He had moved past that. He no longer needed anyone to validate him, but something made him stop and look at her. She took a step toward him, and he noticed that she was nervous. I didn't know what I was doing," Brooke said, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it before. She seemed genuinely uncomfortable, and Miguel could see that there was more to this than just a hollow apology. She had watched the impact his success had caused, and now she seemed to be dealing with her own insecurities. Miguel looked at her for a moment, and instead of reacting with anger or frustration, he simply smiled. A small smile, but full of meaning. "I know you didn't, Brooke, and that's okay. I'm not here to judge you or make you feel guilty, but if you want to change, if you want to be better, only you can do that." He took a step back, feeling light. There were no more grudges. He had nothing left to prove to anyone, not even to those who had underestimated him. Brooke stood there, frozen, looking at him. Miguel, with a deep sigh, turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind the weight of a past that had finally been settled. The days following the reunion were a whirlwind of commitments and interviews. Miguel knew that the visibility his story had gained was just another reflection of his hard work, but he wasn't concerned with showcasing or seeking more recognition. His transformation wasn't for others. It was for himself. He had already done what many would consider impossible. He proved to himself and to the world that the limits imposed by others were not his. Miguel was sitting in his office, looking out the large window that offered a privileged view of the city, the lights flickering in the distance, the movement of the streets, and the accelerated pace of life pulsating through the city were perfect metaphors for what he felt now. A constant flow of new challenges and new opportunities. His tech empire was growing, his company was on the right track, but what mattered most was what he was becoming as a person, as a leader. He smiled to himself, remembering the early days when he used to hide in the back of the classroom, trying to go unnoticed. He remembered the discomfort of feeling different, the fear of not being accepted, the worry that his dreams would never materialize. But he also remembered when he decided to stop waiting for others, when he realized that the only judgment that mattered was his own. He had taken the first step that day, when he chose to follow the path of programming and innovation, even when everyone around him doubted him. But now, looking at the employees in his company and the countless opportunities for collaboration and growth, Miguel realized he had created something much bigger than himself. He was no longer just a programmer. He had become a mentor, a leader, someone who could help others achieve what he had. He wanted more than just to make money. He wanted to build a legacy that inspired others to never give up, to believe they too could transform their lives. One quiet afternoon, Miguel received an email from a young programmer just starting out in his career, who, after reading his story, decided to share his own doubts and challenges. Miguel read the message and felt deeply moved. This kind of contact, this kind of exchange, was what really made a difference to him. He remembered the times when someone, back in the day, had believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He knew that now he had the power to do that for others, and that was what he wanted, to be the spark that ignites other sparks. Miguel didn't just invest in his company, he invested in the people around him. He encouraged his employees to develop, to get the best out of themselves, just as he had done. He believed that by giving others the opportunity to shine, he was leaving a much bigger mark than any financial success could provide. He also thought about what was still to come. The future for him wasn't just about expanding business or recognition. It was about continuing the evolution of his own journey, about being an example for the new generations of entrepreneurs that would come, perhaps even those who were there, in his office, working by his side. Miguel's legacy wouldn't be measured only by the numbers of his company or the fame he had achieved, but by how he had influenced people's lives, by the way he had proven, through his actions, that we all have the power to shape our own destiny. In his mind, he recalled a piece of advice his mother had given him, something that always resonated in his head. The world will try to make you believe you're small, but true greatness comes from what you do, not from what others say you can be. He finally understood that being great wasn't about being at the top, but about staying true to yourself, even when the world tries to divert you from your path. That night, as he left the office, Miguel took one last look at the building, where his journey of so many years was documented and lived. He knew life would never be easy, that adversities would always surround him, but he was ready for whatever came. He was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. He had become the person he always wanted to be, someone who not only achieved his own dreams, but helped others achieve theirs. The walk to his car was peaceful. He no longer felt the anxiety he once did. Each step he took was more confident, more aware of his worth. Miguel knew that, though challenges would never stop coming, he had the confidence and strength to face them. He had found his peace, his mission, and now he was ready to move on to the next chapter of his life. The future was uncertain, but he knew that, looking back, he could finally say, "I've gone beyond. I am who I've always wanted to be." Miguel looked at the computer screen, observing the graphs and growth projections for his company. Everything was going according to plan. His products were gaining more market share, and his company's name was starting to become synonymous with innovation. However, he felt that something was still missing. Financial success was gratifying, of course, but he knew there was more to achieve. He wanted to be remembered not just as a successful businessman, but as someone who made a difference in other people's lives. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He thought back to his childhood, the nights when he lay in bed with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, dreaming of a better future. For a long time, that future seemed distant, almost unreachable. He remembered how simply being who he was made him feel inferior. Prejudice, poverty, and loneliness seemed like insurmountable barriers, but slowly, he learned that those barriers only existed in his mind. The world could try to put him in a mold, but he knew he was capable of breaking it. Miguel reflected on his journey so far. He had overcome so much, not just the lack of resources, but also the fears and limitations he had imposed on himself. For so long, he believed he wasn't good enough. He believed the cruel words he would hear from his classmates. But now, he was at a point where he could look back with pride, knowing that he had earned his place in the world. What motivated him now, more than ever, was the idea of creating opportunities for those who, like him, once felt invisible. He wanted to be a mentor, someone who helped young entrepreneurs believe in themselves, even when the world seemed to be against them. Miguel knew his experience wasn't unique, but he also knew that he could help those who needed a chance to shine. In his office, an idea came to him. He decided to create a mentoring program for new entrepreneurs, especially those from humble or marginalized backgrounds. He didn't want others to go through the same struggles he had faced without a support system. The success of his company wouldn't be the measure of his legacy. The real legacy would be helping others achieve their dreams, feel worthy of their ambitions, and not give up when the world told them they weren't enough. Miguel paused, looking at the horizon through the window. He felt the future was just ahead, and for the first time, he felt that the path ahead was full of even greater possibilities. He knew the difficulties would continue to arise, but he had already overcome the biggest obstacle, self-doubt. As he reflected on everything he had accomplished, Miguel realized that his true goal now was simple, but powerful: to help others become the best version of themselves. He no longer wanted to be just the example of individual success. He wanted to be part of something bigger, something that inspired many others to follow their own dreams. And finally, he knew his journey was only just beginning. Miguel was back in his office again, but now his routine had shifted somewhat. He no longer spent as much time in front of the computer as he had before, but he was more involved in the process of mentoring and guiding the new entrepreneurs who connected with his company. He knew that his journey wouldn't be complete until he helped others follow the same path he had walked. The mentoring program, which initially seemed like a distant idea, was becoming a solid reality. He remembered the conversations he had with some of the first entrepreneurs who reached out to him. There was a new energy in each of them. They were like him, with big dreams but few resources or support. He saw in their eyes the same spark he had when he started, the same fear of failure and self-doubt. One of these young entrepreneurs, Lucas, a programmer from a small town in the countryside, became his first formal mentee. Lucas had a revolutionary project that could change how small businesses managed their data, but he was insecure, thinking the market would never accept him. Miguel saw something in him that made him believe he had what it took to move forward. During their first mentoring session, Miguel asked Lucas about his biggest difficulties. The young man hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "I know what I'm trying to do could work, but sometimes I feel lost, like there's no guarantee of success, and with every door that closes, I feel like I'm failing." Miguel smiled, knowing exactly how he felt. "I felt the same way," he said calmly. "I remember all the times people told me my project was an impossible dream. And you know what I learned? Success doesn't come from certainty, but from persistence. You will face obstacles. Yes, but it's not those obstacles that define your success. What defines your success is how you rise after you fall. Miguel spent the following weeks helping Lucas refine his idea, providing feedback, connections, and even some initial capital to help get the project off the ground. But more importantly, he was helping Lucas find his own confidence, understanding that failure wasn't the end, but a lesson to be learned. Meanwhile, Miguel's company continued to grow, but now he saw his work in a different light. He was just as involved in mentoring and giving others the tools to build their own success stories as he was in his own company. He felt fulfilled in a way he had never felt before. The true satisfaction came from watching someone overcome their own barriers and achieve their goals. One Friday morning, Miguel was in his office, a stack of reports in front of him, when his phone rang. It was a message from Lucas. "Miguel, I did it. The software I created has been accepted by a big company to implement in their sector. I'm officially launching my business." Miguel read the message with a smile on his face. He felt a wave of pride and satisfaction, but he knew the credit wasn't all his. The credit was Lucas's, for having persevered, for not giving up when doubt consumed him. He immediately replied, "You made it because you believed in yourself. Now the rest is just the beginning. Keep going." This was the kind of legacy Miguel wanted to build. He wanted to be remembered not just as a successful businessman, but as someone who opened doors for others, who helped them find the strength within themselves to overcome any challenge. He knew that true greatness wasn't in his own journey, but in the many journeys he would inspire along the way. Still, Miguel's mind remained restless. He knew the work would never end. The world would continue to change, and he would need to adapt, reinvent himself. But as he looked to the future, he no longer felt afraid of the unknown. He had the tools to face it. And more importantly, he had the confidence that he wasn't alone. The legacy he had started to build would be the foundation of something much bigger, something that would be passed down to future generations. Miguel was at a turning point. His company was well established, with a loyal customer base and a growing reputation in the market. But deep down, he felt that there was still something missing. He had done a lot, but there was something more that needed to be done to ensure that the legacy he was building would last. Individual success was satisfying, of course, but Miguel wanted his journey to be more than that. He wanted to leave something that would survive him, something that would continue to inspire long after he was gone. For months, he had been thinking about how to take his mission to the next level. He knew he couldn't do it alone. The mentoring program he had created was already underway, but he wanted more. He wanted to create a foundation that helped young people from marginalized areas develop technological skills, offering resources, training, and a support network for aspiring entrepreneurs. But things didn't come easy. Creating a foundation wasn't just a matter of willpower. Miguel knew he would have to deal with bureaucracy, find investors and partnerships, and ensure that the project was sustainable in the long run. There were many obstacles ahead, but he was determined to face them, just as he had faced every other challenge in his life. In the following days, he began working tirelessly. Meetings with investors, discussions about possible partnerships with universities, visits to different communities to understand local needs. It was a lot of work, but Miguel felt a renewed energy. He wasn't just building a financial empire anymore. He was building an impact network, something that went beyond the limits of the market. He wanted future generations to have the same opportunities he didn't have, but with the advantage of being able to rely on a solid and reliable support structure. As time passed, Miguel noticed the difficulty of balancing the foundation and the company. There were days when he felt overwhelmed, not knowing how to balance his new projects with his business responsibilities. But with every challenge, he felt his determination grow even more. He knew the foundation was the way to leave a lasting legacy, and he wasn't going to give up on it. It was during a meeting with his main investors that he had an epiphany. They were discussing the impact of his company on the market and the future of its innovations. But Miguel knew the most important impact was yet to come, not through technological innovations, but through the lives he could transform with the foundation. "I have something I need to share with you," he said, interrupting the conversation. "We're doing well. The company is on the right path, but there's something bigger I need to build. I'm no longer just concerned with the numbers or the growth of my company. I want to do more. I want to make sure the people who are starting out now, those who don't have the same opportunities I had, can build something as big as what I've built. And that will only be possible with all of your help." The investors looked at each other, surprised by the statement. Miguel wasn't asking for more money for the company. He was asking for support for a bigger cause, one that went beyond money and corporate success. He was inviting them to be part of something that, if successful, would have a much greater impact than any product or technology. He continued, "I know it's a challenge. I know it won't be easy, but I believe that Together, we can create something that goes beyond what any of us imagined. The meeting ended with a sense of anticipation in the air. Miguel knew there was still much work ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that he was on the right path, not just for him, but for everyone around him. He was about to build a legacy that wouldn't be measured by profits or recognition, but by the lives he would help transform. The year passed quickly for Miguel. He looked out the window of his office, watching the city bustle that never seemed to stop. His mind was filled with a mixture of concerns and expectations. The foundation was underway, but the challenges were even more complex than he had imagined. Dealing with bureaucracy, lack of resources, and the fear of failure were obstacles he still had to overcome. But now, more than ever, he was determined to do whatever was necessary. The first mentoring classes were finishing their cycles. He saw people like Lucas, one of his first mentees, not only successfully launching his own business, but also starting to support others who were at the same point he was. Each new success story, each new company launched, brought another smile to Miguel's face. He knew that by helping someone reach their goals, he was planting a legacy that would continue long after his time. Miguel remembered his first meeting with Lucas. He saw the same insecurity and lack of confidence he once carried when he was younger. During the first few weeks of mentoring, Lucas was very shy, hesitant to share his ideas, but slowly he began to open up, and with Miguel's support, his vision started to take shape. The young programmer now had his own business, and his products were beginning to attract the attention of large companies. Miguel felt proud, but he knew that the real satisfaction didn't lie in what he had done for Lucas, but in the fact that Lucas had believed in himself. In addition to individual mentoring, the foundation was also creating more partnerships with schools and universities. Miguel had begun visiting these institutions, offering talks and guidance for students interested in pursuing technology careers. During one of his visits to a public school in the outskirts of the city, Miguel saw in their eyes the same spark he saw in Lucas. He knew that right then and there, the future generations of entrepreneurs were being born, the ones who would have the power to change the future of many communities. Miguel was also increasingly involved with his team at the foundation. He realized that the hardest part of the process wasn't finding talented people, but helping them believe in their potential. The life stories of these people deeply moved him. Many of them didn't even have access to quality education, but still, they were capable of accomplishing extraordinary feats when given the opportunity. The impact of the foundation was even greater than he had imagined. However, Miguel knew there was still much to be done. The foundation was growing, but the road wouldn't be easy. He needed to ensure that the resources were maintained sustainably, that more investors became involved, and that the foundation received the visibility it needed to reach more young people across the country. Meetings with potential investors became more frequent, and he had a very clear pitch in mind. The foundation wasn't just a charitable cause. It was a tool for shaping the future. One night, after one of these meetings, Miguel found himself alone in his office, reflecting on how much he had changed since the day he decided to create the foundation. He thought about the impact of his actions, but he knew his vision was still a work in progress. He wanted to see the foundation grow, but more than that, he wanted to see the young people it helped become leaders, mentors, and examples for future generations. I have a bigger mission now, Miguel thought, looking at the city below. It's no longer about proving something to myself. Now, it's about helping the world be better. Over the years, the foundation solidified as one of the largest social initiatives in the country, with dozens of young entrepreneurs helped to start their own businesses. The impact Miguel had made went beyond what he had imagined. He had created a support network that was transforming people's lives and communities, giving them the chance to overcome adversity and reach their dreams. And as the sun set on the horizon, Miguel looked to the future with a sense of fulfillment. He no longer needed applause or public recognition. What mattered was that he knew his mission had been accomplished, and that he had created something that would remain for a long time, long after his own existence. Miguel was in his office once again, staring out the window at the city that now seemed to be his. He had come a long way from the boy who once believed he would never succeed. The foundation was fully operational, his company was reaching new heights, and he had managed to change the lives of so many people over the years. But as he looked back, he knew that it wasn't just his success story that mattered. What truly mattered was the legacy he was leaving. He remembered his mother, the words she told him when he was still a child. The world will try to make you feel small, but true greatness lies in the impact you have on others' lives. Those words, which once seemed so distant, now made perfect sense. Miguel knew that his mission was complete, that he had touched many lives, and by doing so, had created something that surpassed any measure of personal success. Still, what gave him the most satisfaction was the fact that he had passed on what he had learned throughout his journey. He no longer needed more recognition or applause. What he wanted now was to ensure that the foundation's work continued, that the resources were always available to new young entrepreneurs, and that his story would be a lasting inspiration to those who came after him. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Lucas, the first mentee he had, who now had a prosperous business. Lucas had been the perfect reflection of everything Miguel believed. Persistence is the key to success, and he had the ability to create his own story. The message read, "Miguel, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for me. I've expanded my business and now I'm mentoring others. Without you, I wouldn't have gotten here. The impact you made on my life is something I want to spread to others. Thank you for showing me I'm capable." Miguel smiled, feeling a wave of emotion. He had done more than just create a company or a foundation. He had given someone the tools to transform their own life, and now that person was helping others do the same. This was the impact he had always wanted to make, an impact that multiplied and inspired others to follow the same path. As he reflected on his journey, Miguel knew that time was passing quickly, but he didn't feel rushed. He was at peace with himself. The success he had achieved wasn't just about money or recognition. True success was about how he helped others grow, become more than they were, believe in themselves, just as he once believed in himself. He grabbed a piece of paper and began to write, as he used to do when he wanted to reflect. The words came easily, almost as if dictated by the experience of his life. "I'm no longer the boy who once believed he wasn't enough. I'm the man who built his own story. And the greatest legacy I can leave is not what I've achieved, but what I've inspired others to achieve. May they follow their dreams. May they know that doubt and fear are just stages, and that true strength lies in persistence." Miguel looked at the screen of his computer, where the foundation's website was being updated. He knew there was still much to be done, but he felt he was on the right path. The foundation would continue to thrive. The young entrepreneurs would continue to be mentored, and the transformation he helped start would be a continuous cycle. He had taken the first step, but now it was time for others. He stood up from his chair and walked over to the window, looking out at the horizon where the sun was setting. He felt grateful for everything he had experienced, for every obstacle he had overcome, for every door that had been opened. And finally, he knew that his legacy was complete. He was no longer searching for something outside of himself. He had already found his true mission. Miguel smiled again, this time with a sense of tranquility. The future was out there, full of possibilities, and he knew that no matter what happened, the work he started would continue to flourish. Miguel was in his office once again, staring out the window at the city that now seemed to be his. He had come a long way from the boy who once believed he would never succeed. The foundation was fully operational. His company was reaching new heights, and he had managed to change the lives of so many people over the years. But as he looked back, he knew that it wasn't just his success story that mattered. What truly mattered was the legacy he was leaving. He remembered his mother, the words she told him when he was still a child. "The world will try to make you feel small, but true greatness lies in the impact you have on others' lives." Those words, which once seemed so distant, now made perfect sense. Miguel knew that his mission was complete, that he had touched many lives, and by doing so, had created something that surpassed any measure of personal success. Still, what gave him the most satisfaction was the fact that he had passed on what he had learned throughout his journey. He no longer needed more recognition or applause. What he wanted now was to ensure that the foundation's work continued, that the resources were always available to new young entrepreneurs, and that his story would be a lasting inspiration to those who came after him. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Lucas, the first mentee he had, who now had a prosperous business. Lucas had been the perfect reflection of everything Miguel believed. Persistence is the key to success, and he had the ability to create his own story. The message read, "Miguel, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for me. I've expanded my business and now I'm mentoring others. Without you, I wouldn't have gotten here. The impact you made on my life is something I want to spread to others. Thank you for showing me I'm capable." Miguel smiled, feeling a wave of emotion. He had done more than just create a company or a foundation. He had given someone the tools to transform their own life, and now that person was helping others do the same. This was the impact he had always wanted to make, an impact that multiplied and inspired others to follow the same path. As he reflected on his journey, Miguel knew that time was passing quickly, but he didn't feel rushed. He was at peace with himself. The success he had achieved wasn't just about money or recognition. True success was about how he helped others grow, become more than they were, believe in themselves, just as he once believed in himself. He grabbed a piece of paper and began to write, as he used to do when he wanted to reflect. The words came easily, almost as if dictated by the experience of his life. "I'm no longer the boy who once believed he wasn't enough. I'm the man who built his own story. And the greatest legacy I can leave is not what I've achieved, but what I've inspired others to achieve. May they follow their dreams. May they know that doubt and fear are just stages, and that true strength lies in persistence." Miguel looked at the screen of his computer, where the foundation's website was being updated. He knew there was still much to be done, but he felt he was on the right path. The foundation would continue to thrive. The young entrepreneurs would continue to be mentored, and the transformation he helped start would be a continuous cycle. He had taken the first step, but now it was time for others. He stood up from his chair and walked over to the window, looking out at the horizon where the sun was setting. He felt grateful for everything he had experienced, for every obstacle he had overcome, for every door that had been opened. And finally, he knew that his legacy was complete. He was no longer searching for something outside of himself. He had already found his true mission. Miguel smiled again, this time with a sense of tranquility. The future was out there, full of possibilities, and he knew that no matter what happened, the work he started would continue to flourish. Miguel took one last look at the building where his journey had started, now filled with new stories and achievements. When he first walked into that building, he never imagined it would become the symbol of his empire, and certainly never imagined that his story would be told in every corner of the world, inspiring millions. What started with a simple idea, born from a curious and determined mind, had transformed into something much larger than he could have ever imagined. He had overcome the limits the world had placed on him, and along the way, he had helped others do the same. But now, he knew his mission was complete. The foundation was more solid than ever. In the past few years, the work that had started modestly with a few young entrepreneurs had spread to thousands of young people, transforming the business landscape in many communities. But Miguel no longer saw himself as the main protagonist of the story. He was now just the catalyst, the beginning of a movement that would continue to expand with or without him. His greatest pride was no longer his own success or his personal fortune, but the collective success of those he had helped. He clearly remembered the first young man who had reached out to him, Lucas, and the impact he had on his life, and he thought, with a quiet smile on his face, about the impact Lucas had had on his own journey. The young man, who had once been lost and directionless, was now a successful entrepreneur, a mentor to others, and more importantly, someone who believed in himself. This transformation was what he had always wanted to see happen with others. It wasn't the numbers of their businesses or the closed deals that he valued most. It was the look in someone's eyes when they finally believed they could conquer the world. Miguel spent most of his last year being actively involved with the foundation, visiting schools and universities across the country. In each of those visits, he met young people who reminded him of his own journey, people with big dreams and little confidence, hearts full of insecurity and minds full of doubt. But in each of their faces, he also saw a spark, a light of possibility that he knew he could ignite. He was determined to continue this mission. Each conversation he had, each lecture he gave, wasn't just about teaching technical skills or sharing experiences. It was about inspiring, about showing young people that the world didn't limit them. He wanted them to know that the only real limitations were the ones we impose on ourselves. Miguel wasn't just creating a foundation of support. He was creating a network of mentors and future leaders who would spread the message that true transformation begins when someone believes in themselves. Miguel's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Lucas once again. The connection with him had never been broken, and he always shared his victories with Miguel. Now, Lucas was mentoring other young entrepreneurs, and his business was growing at an impressive rate. The message read, "Miguel, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for me. I've expanded my business, and now I'm mentoring others. Without you, I wouldn't have gotten here. The impact you made on my life is something I want to spread to others. Thank you for showing me I'm capable." Miguel smiled as he read the message. There were no words to express how touched he was by this realization. When he looked at Lucas's trajectory, he saw not just the success of an individual, but the reflection of a much larger movement he had started. The impact of his foundation and his story was multiplying. It wasn't just Miguel always believed that the greatest limits we face are not imposed by the world around us, but by the beliefs we hold in our own minds. He knew that true power of transformation came from within. The journey he took wasn't just about achieving success or conquering the impossible. It was about discovering that the greatest challenge was overcoming self-doubt, the limitations we impose on ourselves, and taking the first step, even when the path seemed uncertain. Looking at everything he had built, the lives he had touched, and the stories he had inspired, Miguel understood a simple but profound truth. Legacy isn't what we leave behind, but what we awaken in the people around us. It's not about being remembered as a hero or an example, but about being the spark that ignites a flame in others, helping them find their own strength and become everything they can be. Miguel's legacy wasn't an empire of wealth or titles, but a network of opportunities. He didn't leave material riches, but he planted dreams, cultivated confidence, and showed the world that anyone, no matter their background or circumstances, could write their own story of overcoming adversity. Miguel knew that the future is not something we wait for passively, but something we build with courage, with faith in the journey, and above all, with the will to inspire and transform the world around us. The true meaning of life is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share. And in the end, Miguel understood that the greatest prize of his life wasn't his personal achievement, but the change he made in the lives of others. True greatness doesn't come from individual accomplishments, but from the ability to create a network of strong, confident people willing to follow their own dreams. And that is what Miguel did. He not only achieved, but he inspired. Not only did he build, but he helped others build. That was the greatest legacy he left, an entire generation of people willing to believe in themselves, and in turn, change the world. Every step we take on our journey, whether in pursuit of success or personal fulfillment, always reminds us that we are part of something bigger. And in the end, we are all capable of being the change we wish to see in the world. You can be the change you wish to see in the world. Miguel's journey teaches us that we all have the power to transform our own lives and the lives of others. What is your legacy? What can you do today to start writing your own story of overcoming and inspiration? Share your ideas and dreams in the comments below. If you feel inspired by this story, make sure to like and subscribe to follow more tales of transformation and triumph. Together, we can continue spreading this message and help create a stronger world with opportunities for all. Now it's your turn to take action. What are you waiting for to begin building your legacy?